Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's been almost 2 years since I presented my former Christadelphian study at this hall back in January of 2023. This is going to be sort of a sequel to that class. I'm hoping that those of you in the audience or watching it live remember a fair amount of what was discussed and brought up in that first class. And it's fine if you don't, because I'll be recapping a bit of it. However, the video of that talk has a little over 1,500 views on YouTube, so I'm sure more people have seen the talk outside this room and are possibly seeing this follow-up video now. For those of you who are watching them in close succession, this presentation is going to feel very similar because I kept most of the same structure from before. If you happen to cross this video on YouTube and you have not watched the first part of this study yet, please find that and watch that first. It's also on my channel, or you can search former Christadelphian study. It should come up there. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, please click here to like and subscribe to my channel. Just kidding, I just always wanted to say that. I'm going to start this class with the exact same message I had in my last one, which was to give a big thank you to all 153 of my participants. And yes, for all of you numerology nerds, it was kind of cool to happen to just randomly have the same number of people responding as there were fishes caught in the disciples' net. It's like I threw out my own net trying to catch as many people as possible and happened to get the same number completely by accident. Anyway, a big thank you to all of them. I want to go over the rules of my presentation this morning, as I did on my last presentation. Please hold all questions until the end. I have a lot of data to get through this morning, and I likely won't actually have time for questions, but I'd like to at least make sure I get through all of it before we open it up to that. I hope this will go without saying, but I want everyone to keep in mind that the findings of this study are nothing but just an aggregation of a bunch of fellow Christadelphians' opinions on various issues. Just because certain people might have a certain feeling or believe a certain way does not mean that you are wrong or they are right. And if you might find your opinion is in the minority, does not mean that you need to change your mind about something. I ask everybody to keep an open mind. The intention of this class is not to try to prove anybody right or wrong, but rather to show how much room there is for discussion and possibly change within the community. Speaking of that community, I want to also remind you all that Christadelphia is imperfect. I know I don't want to freak anybody out, but I think you'd all agree that any community filled with a bunch of human beings is liable to have some issues. Our group itself is imperfect, and our belief system is also imperfect. We do not believe that our religion was directly inspired by God. You know, the Mormons, they get to believe that an angel came down and told Joseph Smith to dig up next to a tree in his backyard, and there's these plates there, and there you go. And if you believe that, it's pretty easy to believe the rest of it. But, we don't have that luxury, really. We believe that, about that same time Joseph Smith was back there, back east, John Thomas was looking at the Christian faiths around him and had some issues with them and, did some study and came to his own conclusions. However, we clearly all have our own interpretation of the minor points of this belief system, as the findings of the study will show. So I just want to make sure we're all open to listening to input from our own brothers and sisters. And just like the last presentation, we're going to look at the same three major parts. First, a quick intro into the study and the participants. Second, the actual data itself with some objective observations based solely on the data. And third, my personal takeaways with some subjective observations and editorializing at the end. So part one, the intro. I had 153 people answering a 30-part survey this time, as opposed to 21 people answering a 10-part survey, so there's a lot more data this time around. But I tried to streamline my presentation a bit. I skipped the slide introducing who I am. Nothing much has changed since last year. And those of you in the room know who I am anyway. So I first wanted to answer this question, why do this study? Many current Christadelphians watched my last study, and while they mostly enjoyed it, I did hear a lot of people say, I don't believe the things you said Christadelphians believe. If you watch the last study, I'd often say things like, so-and-so left Christadelphia because they believe one thing and Christadelphians believe something else. I would speak for the whole community, when in reality I was probably only conveying maybe the macro beliefs of the community as opposed to the micro beliefs of the individuals. I thought it was valuable to give them a voice in this study. Maybe find those who thought themselves in the minority were actually in the majority. One of the most disheartening things that I heard Christadelphians say after the last talk was essentially, why should I listen to what former Christadelphians say? They're already out, so why should we change our community to fit people who probably are never coming back anyway? Remember that my goal here is not to demand any immediate change, but rather to encourage discussion among the Christadelphians in hopes they'll listen to their own people more than people who have already left. And also, something I was really hoping to do with this study is to take my small sliver of 153 people, maybe use them to show that maybe the beliefs that you thought the community at large had are not so widely held. Maybe you think you're in the minority with your thoughts and beliefs, so maybe it would be helpful to hear this study to find out that you are not. Or maybe you think you're in the majority and you find out that you are not. And maybe that could also be helpful to have you revisit those beliefs, or maybe engage with Christadelphians on the other side of the issue in some much-needed discussion. This one's obviously, the dream and the best-case scenario, but so many people who I spoke to in my last presentation said they had these doubts and feelings that they were just keeping inside and holding on to, and were afraid that if they let anybody know about them, that they would feel ostracized. So it's a hope to help prevent people from leaving that are having these doubts. If hearing this class can make a few people think, oh wow, maybe I'm not so weird after all, then I think that'll be totally worth it. Then of course I had my rules, just like the last part of the survey, some rules I had to set for myself. I kept the same first rule, to stay unbiased. Might seem a little silly in this case, considering that everybody in this one is actually currently Christadelphian, as I am. I'm not even, last time it was former Christadelphians, I could stay a bit unbiased from them, but I, however, want to make sure that I kept all of my questions clear and not leading in any way towards a response I might have wanted. It was important. I tried not to push my personal beliefs or maybe phrase a question in the way to make them answer that way. I also didn't want to push my ideal respondents. The biggest self-criticism that I had about my own study last time was that everybody used to live in California and were all people that I personally knew. Now, I was not particularly close with many of them, but I was definitely close with some, so my reason for that was that I wanted everyone to feel more comfortable opening up to me about this very difficult topic. I wanted everybody in this immediate community to know everyone's names and for it to kind of hit closer to home. However, for this one, I wanted to cast as wide of a net as possible to catch my 153 fish. So the requirements for the participants this year was not as stringent at all as it was last time. I didn't want to restrict the respondent pool as much as before, so my first request this time was they must be regularly attending a memorial service in person or by Zoom once a month. I didn't mean to personally exclude people who are in isolation or might count themselves as Christadelphian but just don't attend a memorial service. Since the point of this study is to provide thoughts, though, on the Christadelphian community itself, I thought it makes sense to find people who are actually exposing themselves to that community with some regularity. And that's it. I really didn't want to restrict anything by age or location or anything else. I put this out on Facebook on August 4th, 2023. I asked that everybody share the post far and wide, but I did not personally share it anywhere besides my own personal Facebook page. I didn't want to go in any particular Christadelphian Facebook groups or anything and share it there. I didn't want anyone to think that I was trying to encourage certain groups or certain pockets of Christadelphia to take the study. I wanted it to be as organic and kind of widespreading as possible. And what I get ended up being exactly that. So I had 153 people respond, and the survey did request some basic information about them, but it was not required. I didn't want to ask for their age, so I asked the number of years they've been baptized as a way of identifying how long they've been in the community. And I asked for names, but they were not required. And the beauty of the internet is you get responses from everywhere. I got 20 from Canada, 19 from Australia, a whopping 46 from the UK. That was primarily London, but quite a few were from Scotland and Wales as well. I don't think I know anybody who lives in Scotland or Wales, but thank you, especially the Glasgow Ecclesia really came in, quite a few of them. We got responses from all over the map here in the US too, quite a few different states all over the country, but predominantly we had 38 from California, from right here. And however, considering I put this only on my Facebook, I was thinking it would be mostly locals, maybe a couple people from outside of the state or country, maybe a few from outside, from the UK kind of thing. So for the vast majority of people to come from different countries and states was awesome and was definitely a huge surprise to me. Also, lastly, the average length of baptism ended up being 30.69 years. This number is important to keep in mind as we go on because 30.69 is a few more than I have under my belt, and I'd imagine many of our respondents to be maybe averaging the age of their 40s possibly, if that's the case. I want to be clear up front that this is an older group of the people that I spoke to last time. These aren't my peers from CYC that I'm catching up with years later for a former Christadelphian study. So these are people from all ages and all backgrounds. And I would argue not the possibly more liberal, younger Christadelphians, Californians that I spoke to in my last survey. And this is going to be an important thing to keep in mind, I believe, as you see some of these results. The lowest duration of baptized member was 4 years, and the longest was 66 years. There's one big difference for this survey as well. No names were going to be shared in this study at all. The logistics of figuring out who was comfortable having their names shared, no one left their contact information. They put their names and had a cool comment. I didn't know how to contact them anyway, so that was kind of oversight on my part. But it was important to have the names mentioned in my last survey. It wasn't as important for me here. I'm going to rely mostly on the actual data, although there will be a few anonymous quotes shared. And all right, here we go. So on to the findings. Like last time, we'll go question by question and share the numbers and responses one at a time. I should clarify that I basically ordered these questions in order of the topics that were most discussed and most frequently brought up in my former Christadelphian study. So we're all going to take a deep breath and dive in head first to question 1. Question 1, regarding the LGBTQ issue and the Ecclesia, which of the following statements do you believe to be true? This is by far the most common topic that came up when discussing with my former Christadelphians, so it seemed right this be the one that should lead it off. Now, something important about this quote, let me read the actual responses first, I guess. So the options they could pick: Christadelphians overall handle the issue well and correctly. Christadelphians need to change to be more inclusive, or Christadelphians need to change to be less inclusive, or I've not wished to answer this question. So something important about this question and all future questions is, first, many of the questions in this survey are opinion-based and are dependent on the individual providing their own metrics based on their internal standards. So when I ask a question with terms like more inclusive or less inclusive, an obvious response might be more inclusive than what? More inclusive than who? What is the metric that we're kind of using here? Certain parts of the country or world are different in how they approach these topics, so what does that mean? And that's true. So I want understood up front, this is based on that person's individual feelings and nothing more. If they feel that Christadelphians need to be more inclusive, then they'll pick that option. That is based on their own metrics. It might be different from yours, and that's okay because it's an opinion-based survey. And that being said, let's look at the results here. This one came in pretty decisive. 58% of all respondents think Christadelphians as a whole need to be more inclusive regarding the LGBTQ issue in the Ecclesia. Quite a few did not want to touch this one, with 20% opting out. That's the highest number of the whole study. If you were to redistribute this and provide a weighted response, meaning you're not taking out all the people who said they don't want to respond and just including those who did, it becomes about over 70% of respondents saying that they think Christadelphians should be more inclusive. Again, I understand that's a bit broad. More inclusive of what? What are we asking if we'll allow and not allow here? So I decided to include a couple hypothetical situations to see where people would draw the line. I based this on a few conversations I had with my former Christadelphian respondents. That takes us to question 2. Please consider this hypothetical scenario. A baptized member of the Christadelphian community has made it known to friends and family that they consider themselves to be attracted to people of the same sex, but they are not actively practicing same-sex relations or identifying as a member of the LGBTQ community. Do you believe that they should no longer be allowed to perform any of the following duties? That's basically all the major ones that most brothers would perform: exhort, preside, pray, read, all the way down to serving on an arranging board. Or you believe they should be allowed to perform all activities. So I put this way because a lot of people who I spoke to said they thought Christadelphians are mostly okay with this issue as long as the people were not acting on it, is the phrase that's often used. And so I said, okay, let's see the results and see what it looks like. So which duties can not out gay person perform? All the duties listed did not even crack 10%. So everybody, 90% of people thought they should be able to do these things, and in fact, over 80% believe they should be able to do all of them. They did not even go through the options and select which one. They said, you know what, that person should be able to do it all. Over 85% actually picked the last option there. And so I said, that's really pretty decisive there, I would think, but let's see what happens if it changes a bit. So that takes us to question 3. So please consider this hypothetical scenario, a baptized member of the Christadelphian community has made it known to friends and family that they are considering themselves to be attracted to people of the same sex, and they are actually practicing same-sex relations and identifying as a member of the LGBTQ community. Do you believe they should no longer be allowed to perform any of the following duties, same things as before, or you believe they should be able to perform all activities still? So the responses here, again, you'll see some bigger numbers. So the numbers obviously go up quite a bit there. Well, none cracked 10% before. They're now averaging in the low 40% with new information in mind. Less than 30% now think this person would be eligible for all activities, where that was at 85% before. The most sacred activity, for lack of a better word, was exhorting, coming in at over 47%, and that makes sense to me. Only 35% thought it should disqualify them from reading. That was the lowest option. Keep in mind what's more interesting here, I think, and keep in mind the same information for all the other graphs you see this morning, is the data that you don't see. Of the people who saw this, only 47% said this person would now no longer be able to exhort. This means, you can read into the negative space there, that 53% of the respondents didn't seem to have a problem with them exhorting. They did not select that option. However, with all these bars, 4 to 5 times larger than they were before, the findings we can clearly gather here that Christadelphians as a whole are more comfortable with a homosexual person that is not acting on those urges. This, of course, is still going to be a sticking point with people in society and also many former Christadelphians that I spoke to who want gay people to not be treated any differently than other members. So we definitely still seem far off from that. That was a tough topic to address right out the gate, but I hope that you can all use it as a springboard here into some more important discussions if you know anybody might be struggling with this issue with themselves or somebody in their family. We had a lot of great responses in the comment section on this topic. What was most funny to me was this person who said, I don't know what section is included. I have a few people who were kind of upset by it. And literally 2 cells down on my Excel sheet with this person who said, we need to be talking more about this topic. This basically summarizes how helpful the comment section was for most questions. We had a few good comments, but mostly frustration and discouraging comments. I guess why you don't supposed to read the comment section really anywhere on the internet. But yeah, I think this does show you there's people who kind of disagree with this topic even being brought up in the ecclesial setting. I think the conflict here is what shows you that it probably should be discussed and should be mentioned because it is an issue that seems to affect quite a few people. So, foot on the gas still, moving forward to question 4, going into a new topic here, regarding women's roles in the ecclesia. Which of the following most closely resembles your beliefs? Christadelphians generally handle women's roles correctly. Women should be allowed to have more roles. Women should be allowed to have fewer roles, or you don't want to answer this question. So, data here again was pretty one-sided. Over 71% of the respondents think women should have more roles in the ecclesia. I did not request for response to say if they were male or female, but a few of them gave their names. I can tell you that it does not appear to be a situation where all the women are saying they should have more roles and the men are saying they should not. It seems to be a pretty even split. Quite a few men say they should have more roles. Quite a few women say it's handled well or they should have fewer roles. So that's, so it does not seem to be an issue of, all men, all women, picking one thing. The 3 people who picked they should have fewer roles is a bit mystifying to me. I don't know. I'm not even sure how. That's a bit surprising. I shall also mention though that a few of these people did disclose to me they attend an egalitarian ecclesia, of which there are a few here in the States, quite a few more I think in Australia and the UK, where women have an equal role to men and can do as many duties as the men do. A very small amount disclose that. I don't think that factors too much into the actual data here. However, even if they did factor that into their decision, if anything, that'll make it skew more in the blue bar here, because maybe those people have said that they should stay the same or lower, but their metric of same or lower is much more roles than ours. So, if anything, the number of more roles could possibly be a little bit higher than that. And you also see the bar of people not wishing to answer the question here is way shorter than the last question. A lot more people seem more interested in this topic. I still want to get into more specifics because, like with the last issue, these are uncertain terms here. More roles than what? Fewer than what? So I decided to ask a few specific questions regarding this issue. Would you be comfortable with women performing any of the following activities that are typically not allowed to perform in most ecclesias during memorial service? These are the main memorial service roles that men usually do, which is exhort, preside, pray, read, serve emblems. or you believe they should not be allowed to perform any of these activities. So I also kind of ordered them in order of kind of sacredness here, with exhort being at the top, the more untouchable ones, and serving emblems kind of at the bottom. And then these results absolutely floored me. Over 53% of all respondents said they think women should be allowed to exhort. That was definitely higher than I thought, for sure. It also seemed that I was bang on with my ordering of these. It seemed to kind of go, steadily higher and higher. And of course, like with the other slides, you have to think of the negative space here and remember that 53% of people think women should be allowed to exhort. There's still 47% who think they should not, so that one's pretty close. But, serve emblems is hitting over 70%. That was absolutely astonishing to me. I have nothing I'll say on this topic other than how surprised I was by numbers being this high. If you think those numbers are high, then let's take a look at question 6. Would you be comfortable with women performing any of the following activities that they might not currently be allowed to perform in your ecclesia outside of memorial service? So there's a lot more here. Teach midweek classes, teach Sunday school to teenagers, teach CYC, teach junior CYC, pray for midweek classes, pray at CYC, pray at junior CYC, serve on an arranging board. So these are all things that kind of mentioned to me by former Christadelphians that women aren't allowed to do here. Again, that might change based on where they're answering this question, but the responses here, or again, you could choose that they should be able to do any of these, or not believe they should be able to do any of these. The numbers here are way higher. The lowest number out of all the activities, weirdly enough, at 64%, is praying for midweek classes. 86% believe they should be allowed to teach junior CYC to teenagers, which is something they're not allowed to do here. 86% believe that. I'll have some more overall findings later, but the data in this portion of the survey shows that the vast majority of respondents would be in support of women members having access to at least a few of these roles. I think we'll get many women on the exhorting schedule soon, sure, but these are other duties seem like much more achievable goals. I found this to be absolutely incredible. One of the things I heard frequently brought up when I was speaking to female former Christadelphians, my previous version of this talk, was the topic of head coverings. Obviously, they weren't saying that being required to wear head coverings was the only problem they had, but it seems to be more symbolic of the problem within the community. It made them feel a bit more ostracized, or they were being constantly reminded that they were a second-class citizen in this room, kind of thing. I was wondering if this specific issue was a big enough talking point for question 7. So I asked that question: for which of the following activities do you believe women should be required to wear head coverings? Memorial service, Sunday school, midweek class, evening activities, or you think they should not be required to wear them at all? So we got 65% of respondents saying that head coverings shouldn't be required at all, which honestly, based on the findings of the previous question, wasn't quite as high as I thought. I thought maybe I hit a hyper-liberal section of Christadelphia before, but I would say that 65% isn't a staggering majority. Over 70% of respondents thought that women shouldn't be required to wear them during memorial service if it's a weighted response, but it only goes up from there. About 85% of respondents saying they shouldn't be required for Sunday school or midweek class. Well, only 65% they shouldn't be required at all. When you drill it down, it appears that many feel like they shouldn't be required in specific instances. It might be a good starting point to start having these discussions as an ecclesia and talk it over with your female members, see how they feel about this and if they feel pressured or obligated to wear head coverings. The individual breakouts were about as I expected there. My next question was regarding Christadelphians' involvement in social issues. As a few of my respondents said, they felt that our community felt very out of touch, detached, or kind of aloof in regards to our response to social issues or injustices and tragedies in the world. So I wanted to address that issue with question number 8. Overall, do you feel Christadelphians respond properly to engagement in governmental involvement or social issues, voting, jury duty, military service, etc.? So you either say we respond correctly, we could be more involved, we should be less involved, or you don't wish to answer this question. So this was definitely interesting to me. This is one of the only survey results we have today where none of the responses hit the 50% mark. We do have the response that Christadelphians should be more involved, coming in at number 1 at 43%, but that's still not the overwhelming number here. If you add the other two together of saying that they respond correctly or should be less involved, it actually is slightly higher than that bar saying that they should be more involved. So it does not seem to be, again, a staggering majority here. However, again, this is a very broad question. What level of involvement are we asking about here? I listed a few, options there, but overall, can we drill this down a bit more? Well, we got to question 9 for that. Question 9 says, do you believe that Christadelphians should be allowed to do any of the following things that are believed by many to be not allowed in this community? Now, well, quite a few here. Vote in presidential elections, local elections, serve as a juror, serve in the military, work as a police officer, hold any job in government, recite Pledge of Allegiance at school or work, or participate in a march/protest for a social cause. Or you do not believe that Christadelphians should do any of those. So there's probably a few others that I missed here, but these are a lot of the things that former Christadelphians kind of brought up as a few of the, their personal anecdotal experience of where they would do these things and get some flack from people in the community. So I was really interested in the results. Let's see what those say. It's kind of all over the map on this one. So I mentioned up front, this survey was opened a little over a year ago, and we were much more separated from the presidential elections in this country than we are now. For those of you watching this on YouTube later or whenever, we're about a month away from the election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but I do wonder if anybody's answers would change now. A bunch of these respondents aren't even from the U.S., so maybe they don't have presidents, maybe they translate it to their own prime ministers or whatever else. But again, we have another slide here with nothing hitting the 50% mark, meaning that the majority of respondents did feel like most of these activities are generally not appropriate for Christadelphians to take part in. One with the highest response rate of acceptance was hold any job in government at almost 40%. I suppose makes sense because that's pretty broad. There are many Christadelphians, including my wife, who teach in public schools. They're technically government-run and funded, and our paycheck is from a government-run school district. There are many Christadelphian firefighters who are technically, working for the government. So, I don't think any Christadelphians have problems with those two professions. I'm sure there are many other examples as well that people wouldn't have an issue with. The lowest acceptance rate was serving the military, and working as a police officer also came in pretty low. Both of those do definitely also make sense to me. There's an increased possibility of you having to kill somebody, which would obviously go against, I think, most of our traditional beliefs. However, there's a few things here that I think are very notable. First of all, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance came in at the second least acceptable thing after serving in the military. That really surprised me. Again, there are many Christadelphians that work in places like schools where the Pledge of Allegiance is said frequently, if not every day. I was surprised that people thought it was more appropriate to be a police officer than to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I should also remind you the large chunk of the respondents are not from the U.S., and it's very likely that reciting the pledge over there is not that big of a deal or not even a thing anybody does in that country. However, we take it pretty seriously here. If you are thought to be disrespecting our country or our flag during the pledge, you can get some serious flack, and those public displays of patriotism are very important to people around us, and they take it very seriously. So maybe that's why Christadelphians feel they need to take a hard stance against it, because it's such a serious patriotic thing. And another minor note is that people felt it was more appropriate to vote in local elections than presidential. I doubt the reason for that is because of any biblical reason. You'd think the same argument that God sets the rulers over men. You think that applied to local or federal, but that was a bit odd. Maybe they think they can make more of an immediate difference in their local community than voting for president does, or maybe many people here locally in California, even if they want to vote, don't feel like they have much of a point of voting for presidential elections because our state happens to usually always vote in the same way anyway, so maybe that plays into it. I'm not quite sure. I thought this wasn't enough for me to just kind of see what everybody thinks about these, so I thought to kind of maybe surprise them with the next question and ask them, which of these activities have you actually done in your life? So not just what you think you shouldn't be allowed to do, but now tell on yourself a bit and tell me what you've actually done before. So these are things that they've done here. This question 9b. So 54% of respondents are being good Christadelphians, saying they've never done any of those things. The most common thing that they've done is vote in local elections, which might possibly answer the last question as to why everyone kind of had that one higher. Maybe they're getting a bit more leniency because they've actually done it before and are trying to justify it a bit in their response here. Another interesting note is that 0 participants have ever served in the military or worked as a police officer. It's not particularly surprising considering those are pretty uncommon careers for Christadelphians. With a sample size of only 153, it's not unlikely you'll get 0. However, it was interesting to me that in just the last question, we had 13% of people saying you should be allowed to serve in the military, 22% saying you should be able to work as a police officer. So those were unpopular questions in the last one, sure, but it's interesting that nobody's actually done it. Maybe in the last one they were kind of saying, oh, my grandpa was in the military. I don't want to condemn him, so I'll say it's okay kind of thing. Also interesting again here is while the pledge was the second lowest on the last graph, it's now the third highest of things people have actually done. Again, the peer pressure in this country particularly is very strong. I'm sure you've all been in the awkward public function where everybody around us starts to say it, and Christadelphians, I'm not really sure what to do. You put your hand and you kind of mumble along, you're not really sure how you should be responding. So I think it's kind of funny that people were really against it and then said, oh, you know what, yeah, I've totally done it before. So I thought that was kind of funny. The next question is regarding our last topic regarding our community's response to a certain outside issue, and that's the ever-growing issue of mental health or other personal issues that a community member might face. The question is, overall, how do you think Christadelphians respond regarding the personal issues of their members, mental illness, physical illness, marital issues, etc.? You think Christadelphians are involved in the correct amount? Christadelphians get too involved? Christadelphians should be more involved? Or do you not wish to answer this question? So a few of my former Christadelphians said that they felt they were really struggling with their faith or maybe with some internal issues about their mental health or spiritual health. They don't feel it's being properly addressed or acknowledged by their brothers and sisters. I feel like we're hearing more and more nowadays about mental health awareness and making sure you're checking in on your friends and loved ones. I like to think that we as a community of not just like-minded religious people, but also friends and family and human beings should be aware of these issues. I thought it was worth asking if overall people think that we should be responding to this differently. So this one brought another majority answer. We have over 54% of the respondents saying that Christadelphians should be more involved. Pretty big group here of almost 18% chose not to answer. But if you take them out, it shakes out to a weighted response of about 66% of actual respondents saying they think Christadelphians should be more involved. I only asked for a few, I had a few options there regarding mental illness, physical illness, marital issues. But I thought I should try another quick question to check in on, again, kind of drill down a bit on some more on just the mental illness issue. So I asked question 11. Do you believe that Christadelphians communities discuss the mental health of their members an adequate amount? Say yes, no, don't wish to answer. So again, this one shakes out probably how you think. No, coming in at the 80% mark, saying Christadelphians do not discuss mental health enough. It's pretty clear that most Christadelphians feel like the mental health of their members is not adequately discussed. Again, I wanted to get a bit more granular with this because my examples before, mental illness, marital issues, what's included in the et cetera there, what other issues could a member have? Also, probably more importantly, how prevalent are these issues in our community? You could be a bit of a cynic and sit there and think, well, I don't think we have these issues in our ecclesia. Maybe a couple, but I don't want to change the way that we operate because a couple people might feel that they, aren't being properly, cared to or whatever. So I asked question 2. Which of the following have you personally dealt with for yourself or for an immediate family member? Mental illness, major physical illness, marital issues, divorce, infidelity, etc. Major legal issues, arrest, harassment, assault, or death of an immediate family member, or you're not dealt with any of these, or you do not wish to answer this question. So I know there's other things that can affect a member, but I thought these would be a good, starting point to kind of see what these ones look like. So again, it's pretty big numbers here. You see that the various infirmities of the flesh here, of the top being mental illness in the lead at almost 73%, the physical illness and death at numbers 2 and 3. Almost half the members have directly dealt with marital issues as well, while a good chunk have also had major legal issues. Only a very lucky 7% are living a very blessed life, never had any of these issues before. And as a continuation of this topic, that'd be interesting to ask people how they thought these issues were handled in their ecclesia. So I asked question 13, if you answered yes to the previous question regarding if you had any of these issues personally, what is your feeling about how your ecclesial community responded to your issue? They were involved in the correct amount, they should have been more involved, they should have been less involved. This one is a bit surprising to me. It's pretty even split. So while 80% of people saying a few slides ago they don't think Christadelphians are discussing mental health enough, if you include all these other factors, all these other things they could be, issues they could be having, it's surprisingly positive. This is actually by far the largest time at the bar saying that we're currently handling something the correct amount. Of course, in a close second place is the opinion that we should be more involved. There might be something that would warrant some further follow-up to see what topics would people want to be more involved in, So maybe people think they could be more involved in checking their mental health, but maybe shouldn't be as involved with, their marital affairs or whatever. Maybe there's certain things they don't want touched and certain things they do. So with that, we come to the end of the specific questions about particular topics. At the end of the survey, I want to put a few more general questions that were partially inspired by comments or thoughts from the former Christadelphians I spoke to, but also some questions I personally thought would be interesting to see addressed in a forum like this. First one of these closing questions was kind of a big one. Have you ever had any serious doubts about your faith or the existence of God? Yes? No? Or you don't want to answer this question. So I know this is a big question coming at the end here, but I wanted to ask it because there are so many former Christadelphians that I spoke to who said they started to have these very foundational doubt shortly before leaving the community, and they often thought they were the only one, or they were an outlier. Nobody else shared these opinions. They were all alone in an island in this big room full of people. But as you can see here from the findings, they were actually in the majority. Almost half of all respondents said they have had these serious doubts before, which I found fascinating. However, I was afraid a few people wouldn't be able to accurately answer this question. It's kind of two different questions here. Having doubts about your faith may be a bit different from questioning the entire existence of God. So I had a follow-up question focusing on just the personal beliefs and doubts about the community. Question 15. Have you ever had any serious doubts about any of the other teachings of the Christadelphian community or the Bible itself? You could say yes, you could say no, you could say you don't want to answer this question. Basically, all of my former Christadelphians said they had one or more major personal or philosophical or biblical beliefs that they were diametrically opposed to regarding the mainstream Christadelphian beliefs. And they might have felt differently about, gay marriage or transgender people or voting or whatever the issue was. And they were so sure that all the other Christadelphians around them were 100% committed and weren't questioning anything the way that they were. Let's see if the data supports that. As you can see, they're definitely not alone with having those doubts. Maybe fewer people are having outright doubts about God's existence, but a pretty healthy majority of people here have had serious doubts of the Christadelphians and or its biblical teachings. It's a pretty big number, and it shows that the Christadelphian community is ready for some deeper investigation and study into their beliefs and practices. But you might be thinking, hold on, why overreact just because people have maybe had these feelings, right? Maybe these were short-lived, fleeting ideas they once had in their youth when they were questioning them, something about Christadelphia, but never went beyond that, right? Maybe they never thought about actually acting on these doubts. To check into that question, we could go to question 16. Have you ever considered leaving the Christadelphian community at any point? The options were yes, no, or you don't wish to answer. Not a very comfortable question to ask, but definitely something I felt was worth including. All of the former Christadelphians I spoke to obviously went through this thought process at some point. Some of them told their friends or loved ones about it, and some did not, but I thought it'd be worth seeing the results. Over 57%, the majority of the respondents said they have thought about leaving Christadelphia before. Again, we don't know for how long or what the exact cause or reason was for that feeling or any of their individual stories, but that is a concerning number. For a faith and a community that we're trying to nurture and grow, to hear that the majority of our group has thought about leaving is definitely difficult to hear. I know I've touched on a lot of difficult topics. You might be kind of bummed out right now. That's definitely not the feeling that I want to kind of leave you with. I'd like to make sure this ends on a bit more of an uplifting note. I touched on this a bit in my previous class, but I did talk a bit about trying to accentuate or emphasize the parts of our community and religion that people appreciate the most while trying to reduce or remove the parts that turn people away. You won't be able to please everybody in a group of people ever, but I thought it'd be a bit more uplifting to try to end on a more positive note. So we go to question 17. Which of the following aspects of the Christadelphian community do you find to be most appealing? Options are sense of community, focus on Bible study, singing/musical praise, or focus on youth groups/CYC. These are a few of the major factors that were mentioned by the people in my last study. So these are a few others that, so there might be a few others that you guys can think of that, you might want to include, but these were kind of the big ones I heard the most. So the results, again, pretty decisive here. Sense of community, just like in my last study, is taking a clear lead at over 80%. For these ones, you can answer more than one. I should have said that at the beginning, so they're not adding up to 100% all the time. They could say multiple ones, but yeah, to have over 80% say they think the community is the strongest part of it is, I think, pretty impressive. Current and former Christadelphians alike seem to agree we have something special here in our tight-knit community. I think that's great. Focus on Bible study is the second there, a bit behind at 53%, with singing and musical praise a little bit behind that. The youth group / CYC response wasn't quite as popular, but it's also worth noting that the former Christadelphians I spoke to were mostly just a few years separated from their CYC years when they left the community, whereas the average response to this study is over 30 years baptized, probably hasn't been in CYC for a bit, so a bit more separated from it. Because that was a big plus when I talked to my former Christadelphians, is they remember feeling so strongly about the CYC experience. Okay, you made it. That's most of the numbers. I know it's a lot of bar graphs and a lot of numbers. If anyone wants to see a copy of the PowerPoint, let me know. If you want to go through the numbers yourselves more solely, I have the Excel sheet, I have everything, I can send it over to you. I basically out of the numbers now and into my own personal takeaways. I did sprinkle a few of my thoughts and takeaways, throughout my findings there, but I was hoping to look at the findings on a more, macro level and see what we can learn from them. My first takeaway here is that we need to challenge the status quo. You might not have noticed, because I didn't really focus on them as much in my bar graphs, but quite a few of the topics I presented had an option to select if you think that Christadelphians are currently handling that topic correctly. Those responses were there for the people who think that the status quo, or how we're currently handling those issues, is correct. You might have noticed that those bars were usually substantially smaller than the others. So I do have one more number for you about that. Only 20.16% chose the status quo answer on average, if you average all the answers out. And the question with multiple other answers, the average was 20.16. I found this very interesting because I think the joke you always hear about Christadelphians is how reluctant or fearful they are of change. This is a bit of an unfair, joke. I think it can be applied to really any organized religion. If you talk to anybody from any church, they'll have the same kind of jokes. I think that these jokes do nothing but feed into the narrative that all Christadelphians just want things to stay the same forever and ever. They don't want things to change. Things are great how they're going, and you shouldn't question them. Don't talk about change. Christadelphians are too scared of it. And I think that's just feeding into a very fearful mindset that makes people who are having doubts feel like they're being ganged up on. Everybody is against them. It's a tough place. It's a tough place to be. I think that we need to make sure that as Christadelphians, we need to not be so afraid of change. Our history, our Bible, is full of people who are forcing a change to their environment. Stories from everybody from Noah through Christ are so compelling and I think relatable to us because they were challenging the status quo of their environment. People around them didn't like what they were doing or saying, but they knew they were right. A couple hundred years ago, I mentioned John Thomas, didn't like the status quo of Christianity. He was seeing it all over everywhere, so he, had some ideas, and we might not be here today without those ideas. So, I think that there's an overall feeling of fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of difference that I think is doing nothing but harming the way that we as a community are feeling, and those who are feeling ostracized are doing nothing but thinking that they can't do anything about it. There's no way they can talk to anybody, any of their friends and family or loved ones about any kind of change. We need to make sure that our religion is comfortable for everyone, not just yourself. I understand completely that I am preaching to myself here just as much as you. I sometimes hear about a new rule or a new thing we're enacting because there was some business meeting about it or something. I grumble to myself, why are they doing that? It was working just fine before. Yeah, for me. It was working fine for me. This is harder and harder for everyone to understand in 2024, but this is not all about you, especially in a setting where former and current Christadelphians alike agree that our community is the strongest part about us. We need to make sure that we are as welcoming and inviting as a community as we can possibly be. My next takeaway is just to appreciate again the responses that I got and how difficult these topics were for anyone to talk about. So a big general thank you again to all of the participants. Many responses that I got admitted in the comment section of my survey they didn't feel knowledgeable enough to answer about the topic that they were being questioned about. That's why they would answer, I do not wish to answer this question lots of the time. They just didn't feel like they really knew how they should answer, or knew how they really feel. And that's hard to admit to. In 2024, in a time of social media, I wish more people had the grace and the self-awareness to say, you know what, I don't know anything about this topic, I'm not going to comment on it. I wish more people did that in the world, but they don't. And I think it's really, mature and brave of them to say, you know what, I don't know enough about LGBTQ people or women's roles, so I'm going to opt out. But maybe that's a good kind of encouragement to yourself. Maybe look more into those things and try to learn more about that. So if these things come up to you, or maybe if a troubled member who's having a hard time, if they're saying, I'm really having a hard time about how they're responding to, voting or whatever. If you don't know anything about that, it's going to be hard for them to, hard for you to kind of talk about that. Is overall a much more aggressive and combative response compared to my last study. I would have thought that a bunch of my former Christadelphians would have been mean and petty and gone, scorched earth and say, all these terrible things about Christadelphia. That couldn't have been farther from the truth. They were incredibly kind and loving and, sharing these really difficult things with me. I was a bit disappointed that so many of my current brothers and sisters were so upset and triggered by this survey. This, by the way, 100% optional survey. The comment section, again, had a few nuggets here at the end. Somebody saying, the survey is asking for trouble. Okay? Surveys like this can only document the existence of opinions. I guess that's fair. I'm not sure what else they're expecting out of an opinion-based survey, but there you go. Someone else said, making results public does a disservice to the brotherhood and the truth. So I guess sorry in retrospect to that guy, but I don't share these to try to make fun of these people that said this, but rather to show that these topics can be very difficult for anybody to even think about, let alone discuss in a loving and caring manner with your brothers and sisters. It's it's an unfair difference, really. I mean, it's when you have the anonymity of the internet, some guy you don't know from a different country asking all these questions. You can say whatever you want. You maybe you don't think he's going to read it. So different when I'm talking to people who I used to know and that I loved for the last study, but still a bit of a shock to the system. You're expecting all your brothers and sisters to really come in with this very loving response. To have the response that I got from quite a few was a bit odd. And my last few takeaways here stem from a few comments from my respondents, which is that they wish these questions were asked specifically of the people in their ecclesia, because they love to know where they land on that spectrum in their own community. I think that's a great idea. Also, I know there's a few people here, listening to this now, maybe even in this room, who are being a bit cynical and thinking, yeah, right, these numbers, they seem way too inflated. Luke probably just got his survey into a bunch of super liberal pockets of Christadelphia. I bet that my ecclesia would be totally different. And that is a reasonable response. It's a bit disappointing, but if that's how you feel, I understand. I am not arguing, at no point would I argue that these are typical of all Christadelphians everywhere. There's too many of us to, get a proper, survey of everybody, but try to be as wide as I can. But look, I understand you might have those feelings. And if you don't think these results apply to you, prove it. Set up your own survey. Ask your brothers and your sisters yourself. Maybe put some Sunday school classes together in the future to maybe re-examine some of these issues. If you're watching this talk thinking, wow, Luke is really kind of skimming across these big topics pretty quickly, that's on purpose. If you're interested in any of the topics of the numbers I brought up this morning, please look into it more deeply with your own ecclesia. My piece of advice I would take to you after talking a lot to former Christadelphians and hearing all these comments and these thoughts on this current Christadelphian survey, the one thing I would definitely recommend if you're going to try to talk about this stuff with your ecclesia, start small. As an example, again, I wouldn't anticipate anybody who's going to watch this survey and then they're going to ask women to exhort, next week or anything like that. However, maybe you start looking into why a woman couldn't read from the podium for memorial service, something that over 70% of my respondents said they were okay with. Maybe ask if they need to keep wearing head coverings, something about 70% also said they don't think they need to wear those anymore. I think we as Christadelphians, I think we as a people think, what's our biggest things we need to fix? What's the biggest problems we have as a community? Okay, it's this? Well, let's talk about that then. And if that doesn't work, you say, well, we tried. Everyone's arguing now, and let's leave it alone for a couple more decades, and we'll come to it later on. But no, I think you need to look at your most achievable goals here and say, look, if 80% of people think we're not talking about mental health enough, what should we do about that, And we should double check that, make sure it's the same in our own ecclesia, and make sure that, it applies to us. If you were to do a survey of your own ecclesia, I can guarantee you this is a win-win situation. Maybe you find out that I was wrong. And instead of maybe the majority of people thinking things need to change, maybe the majority of people in your ecclesia think things should stay the same. And that's great. You found a community that shares your personal beliefs, and now that's been quantitatively reaffirmed. However, I'm guessing it's not going to be 100%. This would be a great opportunity to identify the maybe 10 to 20% of people who disagree, and maybe check in with them. Those are the people in your ecclesia who are most at risk of becoming former Christadelphians. Most of my former Christadelphian respondents mentioned a feeling of isolation within their own loving community towards the end, causing them to feel like they had to leave. They had to leave to benefit everybody else around them. Staying any longer would be a disservice to the brothers and sisters that they so loved, and they were so sure had no doubts and no problems and no thoughts that would share that shared with their own. Put yourselves in that position. If the majority of your brothers and sisters in your ecclesia disagree with you on some major topics, that's scary, and something I would think any ecclesia would want to look into. Or, what if the opposite happens? What if you find out that the majority of people in your ecclesia think things should change from the way they're currently set up? Well, then why are you all still doing it the same way? Do what good Christadelphians do, take out your Bibles, look into it as a community, as a group, see if you can make some changes to your ecclesial practices that make everybody feel more at home in the ecclesia. My last and final thought this morning is just to remind everybody to check in on your brothers and sisters. Many former Christadelphians I spoke to felt very isolated and alone in their thoughts and doubts, even when they were attending a room full of other brothers and sisters every week. I was hoping the problems and doubts would be lower within our community, but there are clearly a large percentage of people who either think that things need to be changed in our community or even have doubts about God or our foundational beliefs. As uncomfortable as it might seem, it's imperative that to maintain our numbers and hopefully start to grow, we need to make sure that many people feel comfortable and at home in this building or in their own ecclesias as we possibly can. I truly believe that when more of us feel comfortable, then people will feel more comfortable to join us and to join this great community. So thank you all again to the respondents and to everybody here this morning. I will close in prayer and we will be dismissed to the refreshments. Our Father in heaven, we come before you this morning. We are hoping that the numbers shared by your children, by your brothers and sisters, by our brothers and sisters throughout the world will be helpful to us, will be beneficial. We pray that we can take these lessons and maybe apply them to our own community and talk to our brothers and sisters more and find out how we really feel about these topics and that we really might make sure that we really know how you feel more importantly, and make sure that we are doing things correctly, that we are following you as closely as we possibly can. We know there is no way to do that other than to be constantly examining our beliefs and our practices and to make sure that we are walking a direct line towards your kingdom. We pray that you will be with us and be with our community, and that you will help us to grow, help us to change, help us to become the as close to perfect as we can, and the best version of ourselves as a brotherhood and as a community of like-minded loved ones. We pray that you will watch over us in all that we do, and in Jesus' name, amen.